There are things in life that we feel before we understand them. A restlessness in the chest, a silence that weighs differently, a smile that arrives too late to be real. I felt all of this. I felt it and ignored it, because when the person you love most in the world opens their hand and offers what seems like a gift, you close your eyes, breathe deeply, and believe. You believe with the faith of someone who spent their entire life waiting for things to finally be truly good. I was 69 years old when I boarded a plane to the United States. 69 years of Jaipur, of the heat that rises from the asphalt in summer, of the smell of cardamom mixed with temple incense, of mornings where I opened the window and knew exactly how the day would sound. 69 years of a life that was mine. Even when it was difficult, even when it was very difficult. My daughter's name is Priya. She went to the United States at 23 on a scholarship that I spent nearly a full year sewing clothes to help fund. I don't regret that. I never regretted it. A mother does what needs to be done, and that's that. I did it. She went. She graduated in engineering, married an Indian man who had also gone there young. They had 2 beautiful children, Arjun and Meera, and built a life in a Texas suburb that, in the photos she sent, looked like it came out of a magazine. For years, I saw her only by phone. Sometimes she called on the grandchildren's birthdays, and I would stare at those children on the screen thinking they barely recognized me, that I was a photo-grandmother, a distant voice, someone who sent sweets in someone's suitcase when they came to visit, and that hurt. It hurt in a way I never told anyone because I felt ashamed of seeming ungrateful. After all, my daughter had a good life, she had succeeded, and I was supposed to be happy. When she called that March afternoon and said she had bought me a ticket, I thought I was going to have a heart problem from how hard it beat. She spoke with a warm voice, full of enthusiasm, saying she had talked with her husband, that they had a room prepared for me, that the boys were eager to truly get to know me, that it was time for me to stop growing old alone in Jaipur while the family was on the other side of the world. She said, "Mom, you deserve to rest. You did so much for me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." I cried a lot, and I excused myself to go to the bathroom before continuing the call because I didn't want her to see me like that, dissolving in gratitude like a child. I thought it was the most beautiful thing that had happened in my life in a long time, perhaps the most beautiful of all. I began preparing weeks in advance. I told my friends from the temple, my neighbor Kamala, who has known me since I had black hair, the woman at the pharmacy who sold me my blood pressure medicine every month. Everyone was happy for me. Some said with that look of someone feeling a pleasant twinge of envy, "How lucky, Anjali. A daughter who cares for her mother like this is God's blessing." And I agreed, because I believed it. I sold some things I couldn't take with me. An old dresser from my bedroom that had belonged to my mother, some pots I kept more out of attachment than use, books I knew I couldn't carry. I gave the key to my apartment to my nephew to keep, because the intention was to stay at least a year, maybe more, maybe forever, depending on how things went. That was a phrase I thought myself, and that would later cost me dearly. The airport was overwhelming. I had never flown outside India. I had been to Mumbai once, decades ago, and to Delhi twice for paperwork, but nothing prepared me for that airport in Doha where I made my connection. So large it felt like an entire city under a glass ceiling. I stood staring at the signs, trying to understand where to go, with my backpack in my lap, and my heart racing, until a uniformed employee noticed my lost expression and helped me with gestures because we didn't speak the same language. I smiled at her with such relief that I think she thought I was going to cry. I arrived in Texas on a sunny April afternoon. Priya was at the airport with the 2 children. Meera, 6 years old, held a sign that read, "Welcome, Grandma," in a child's crooked letters, and Arjun, 8 years old, watched me with that serious curiosity boys that age have. Priya hugged me. It was a good hug, one of those that really squeeze, and I closed my eyes inside that hug and thought, it was worth it. Everything was worth it. Her husband, Vikram, was outside with the car. He's a polite man, correct smile, firm handshake. But I always had the impression that with Vikram, things stay measured. Nothing overflows. He greeted me respectfully, took my larger suitcase without me needing to ask, and asked if I had slept on the plane. I said not much. He made a sound of understanding and asked nothing more. The house was large, larger than I had imagined. 2 floors, front garden, enclosed garage, one of those American kitchens with a white countertop that I had only seen in films. My room was on the 2nd floor, with its own bathroom and a window overlooking the backyard. It was beautiful. It was comfortable. I placed my small bag on the bed, looked around, and thought I was in a dream. That first night, we ate together. Priya made rice with dal and a spiced chicken, the way she knew I liked it. The children asked questions in English mixed with a few Hindi words, and I answered as best I could, and everyone laughed, and it felt like a real family. After dinner, Vikram went to his office to work, the children went to sleep, and I sat with Priya in the kitchen drinking tea. It was there that she explained the house routine. She and Vikram left early for work. The children went to school in the morning, but first they needed to eat breakfast, get ready, grab their backpacks. After school, they stayed home until dinner. "Mom, you'll love being with them," she said with that smile. "You always loved children." That was true, but as she spoke, something in that smile seemed different from the smile at the airport. Smaller, more calculated. Or perhaps I was too tired from the journey to think clearly. That night, I lay in the bed of the beautiful room and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the silence was different from the silence of Jaipur. There, even late at night, there was always some sound. A dog, a distant motorbike, the wind in the branches of the mango tree that grew near the window of my old room. Here, it was a closed silence, without texture, as if the world had been vacuum sealed. I prayed. I gave thanks for the journey, for the arrival, for the family. I asked for health so I could help. I asked for patience, and I asked quietly, almost ashamed to ask, that this be truly good, that I had made the right choice. I fell asleep, not knowing that in less than 2 weeks I would understand that that large, beautiful house had walls that hid things no lit window seen from outside could show. They say you truly get to know a person when you live with them, not in visits, not in phone calls, not in family photos posted on social media with everyone smiling and well-dressed. The truth of a person appears in daily life, in unfiltered mornings, in unrehearsed conversations, in moments when no one is watching and they forget to be who they were pretending to be. It took me 69 years to learn this about my own daughter, and I learned it in the worst possible way. In the first week, everything still had the shine of novelty. I woke early, before everyone, and sat in the kitchen with my tea, watching the house come alive. The children were restless and noisy in the mornings, as children should be, and I liked that. Arjun lost a sock every single morning without fail, and Meera spent an eternity in the bathroom on a hair ritual she took far more seriously than her age might suggest. I helped as I could. I found the sock, braided Meera's hair, packed the lunchbox, warmed breakfast. Priya and Vikram left in a rush, him in a suit, her with a bag over her shoulder and the phone already in her hand. And the door closed, and the house was just mine and the children's until the school bus came. After the bus took the children, I was alone for hours, and it was in those hours that the silence began to weigh differently. I couldn't go out alone because I didn't know the neighborhood, didn't speak enough English to manage in an emergency, and had no car and didn't know how to drive. The neighborhood was the kind where everything is far away and nobody walks. The houses were spaced apart, the sidewalks almost empty, and I would stare out the window at that wide, quiet street, feeling as though I were inside a very beautiful glass box. At first, I filled the time cleaning, organizing, cooking. I made dinner well in advance so it would be ready when everyone came home. I swept the floors, folded clothes, cleaned the bathrooms. I thought I was contributing. I thought this was what a mother does when she goes to live with her children. She helps. She makes herself useful. She doesn't just consume. But it was in the second week that I realized what I was calling help had a different name inside that house. It was a Tuesday. Priya came home from work later than usual, with that expression of someone who had a bad day and was keeping the bad inside herself with difficulty. She came in, threw her bag on the sofa, went to the kitchen, lifted the lid of the pot, looked at the curry I had made and said, without looking at me, "Mom, I already told you that Vikram doesn't like very spicy food." I froze. She had not told me that. Or if she had, it had been in passing, without firmness, without the seriousness she was using now. I said I hadn't put in much spice, that I had been careful. She didn't respond. Served the plate anyway, called the children for dinner, and the subject died. But something didn't die. Something remained in the kitchen air after everyone left, a tension as thin as a hair, which I tried to ignore but felt throughout the night. The next day, I cooked with less spice. The day after, less still. I kept adjusting, calibrating, trying to get it right, but the problem was never just the spice. One time it was the way I folded the children's clothes, which according to Priya wasn't the way they liked. Another time it was because I forgot to close the garden tap after watering the plants, and Vikram noticed and told Priya, who told me with a voice that tried to be calm but wasn't. Another time it was because I put Arjun's backpack in the wrong place and he came home from school without finding it and made a scene. Every small thing became a remark, and the remarks grew larger over time, more frequent, sharper. Priya never shouted. That I must say honestly. She never raised her voice in a way I could call explicit rudeness, but there was something in her tone, an exaggerated patience, the patience of someone who thinks they are speaking with someone who doesn't quite understand, that cut more than any shouting would have. She spoke slowly, with a pedagogical clarity that made me feel small in a way I had never felt before. Not when I was poor, not when I was young and knew nothing. By the third week, I had understood the real structure of my life in that house. In the morning, I woke at 5:30 to prepare the family's breakfast before everyone got up. I looked after the children until the bus. I cleaned the kitchen, swept the rooms, mopped the living room floor. I put clothes in the wash, folded the ones that had dried. I made lunch for myself alone because the children ate at school. In the afternoon, I received the children, helped with homework, which was complicated because the English in the exercises I could barely read. I made dinner. After dinner, I washed the dishes while Priya and Vikram went to the living room to watch television or to the office to work more. And then I went up to my room and lay staring at the ceiling until I could fall asleep. It wasn't a life. It was a work shift that never ended, and for which I received nothing but a room and food. And the worst part was that I couldn't even name what was happening to me without feeling ungrateful. Because where I was living was beautiful. Because I had good food every day. Because my daughter was not mistreating me in any way, I could show someone and say, "Look, see what she's doing." Everything that was happening was invisible. It was made of absences, pauses, glances that lasted a second longer than they should, of thanks that never came. 1 month after my arrival, I called Kamala, my neighbor from Jaipur. I called in the afternoon, while the children were still at school and the house was quiet. She answered with that animated voice of hers and asked how it was going. I opened my mouth to speak and couldn't. I stayed a few seconds in silence, and she said, "Anjali, is everything all right?" And I said yes, that everything was wonderful, that the grandchildren were marvelous, that the house was very beautiful. I excused myself by saying there was something on the stove and hung up. I don't know why I lied. Perhaps out of shame. Perhaps because saying out loud what I was feeling would make it real in a way I wasn't yet ready for. Or perhaps because I still believed that things would change. That at some point, Priya would return to being the daughter I knew. The girl who hugged me when she was afraid, who slept with her head in my lap when she was sick, who called me crying from university when things got hard. I still believed that Priya existed somewhere inside the woman who lived in that Texas house. It was on a Friday evening that the last illusion fell away for good. Vikram had invited some friends for dinner, and I had spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, setting the table. When the guests arrived, Priya introduced me in passing, barely pausing. "This is my mother. She's visiting us." Visiting. After a month of caring for the house, the children, everything, I was a visitor. The guests smiled politely and turned back to each other, and I went to the kitchen to continue serving. That night, lying in my room while I heard laughter from downstairs, I understood that the beautiful room, the comfortable bed, and the window with the garden view were not gifts. They were payment for the service I performed every day without anyone having the courage to call it by its real name. And I, who had sold my old dresser, given the key to my apartment to my nephew, and said goodbye to my temple friends believing I was beginning the most beautiful chapter of my life, found myself lying in a foreign land, thinking about the mango tree outside the window of my old room in Jaipur. I had never missed a tree so much in my life. there is a kind of loneliness that is worse than being alone. It is the loneliness of being among people and not being seen, of opening your mouth and not being heard, of existing within a space and feeling that your presence is tolerated, not wanted. I came to know this kind of loneliness inside that Texas house, and I can say with complete certainty that it is heavier than anything else I have ever carried in my life. And I have carried many things. The month of May arrived hot, different from the Jaipur heat I knew like the palm of my hand. That Texas heat was humid, sticky, without the dry breeze I was used to. I stayed in the kitchen in the early mornings with the windows closed because Vikram preferred the air conditioning on, and sometimes I missed the simple act of opening a window and letting the air come in however it wished. Small things. You only realize how much small things matter when they are taken from you. The routine had solidified in a way that no longer felt like a routine. It felt like fate. I woke, worked, slept, woke again. The days had the same texture, the same sequence, the same weight. And within that repetition, I began to notice other things that at first I had attributed to the stress of a busy family, but that over time I could no longer ignore. Priya rarely ate dinner with me. When the children came home from school and I served their afternoon snack, she was in her room with her phone or in the living room with her computer. When dinner was ready, she came, served her plate and Vikram's, took them to the living room, and ate in front of the television. I stayed in the kitchen with the children, who after eating ran off to play, and then I was alone at the large table with my plate and the low sound of the television coming from the other room as a company that wasn't mine. One evening, I tried to change this. I set the dining room table, which was rarely used, with nice plates, glass cups, a water pitcher with lemon slices the way I had seen on a cooking show on television. I made a special dish, a biryani that took more than 3 hours to get right, with the rice perfectly cooked and the meat tender. When Priya came home from work and saw the table, she stopped at the living room entrance with an expression that I couldn't read at the time, but that I understand now. It was the expression of someone caught off guard by an obligation they hadn't asked for. She said she had a headache, that she was going to eat in her room. Vikram said he had an important work call. The children ate quickly and went to their rooms. I cleared the table, put the nice plates back in the cabinet, served the biryani into plastic containers to keep in the refrigerator, and washed everything alone. I didn't cry that night. There were tears, but they stayed somewhere inside my chest without being able to come out, like water dammed up that finds no way through. It was during this period that I began to connect with the grandchildren in a deeper way. Arjun and Mira were children born in the United States, raised in English, with references I barely understood. But children have a capacity to cross any barrier when they want to, and they wanted to. Mira began asking me to tell stories before bedtime. I told them in Hindi, with some English words mixed in, and she would stare at me with wide eyes, completely absorbed, even when I was certain she wasn't understanding everything. And Arjun, who was more reserved, began appearing in the kitchen while I cooked and sitting on the stool watching me in silence, simply present, with that quiet companionship that is sometimes more generous than any conversation. They were the ones who saved my days. They were the reason I could get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning without feeling I was getting up for nothing. But even this bond, which I cultivated with such care, had its limits within that house. Because sometimes Priya would come in and see the children sitting with me listening to a story, and there was something in the way she looked at that scene that made me feel as though I was doing something wrong without knowing what. One day, I overheard a conversation between her and Vikram in the hallway. I was in my room with the door slightly open, and they hadn't realized I was awake. Vikram said, in a low but clear enough voice for me to hear, that the house always smelled of spice and that his friends had commented. Priya answered that she would talk to me, and then there was a pause, and he said something more that I didn't understand well, and she said, "I know, but what do you want me to do? She's here now. She's here now." I kept repeating that phrase in the dark of my room as if they were words from another language I needed to translate. She's here now. Not, she's my mother. Not, I'm the one who brought her. She's here now. Like a weather problem. Like an unavoidable inconvenience. Like something that had happened and now needed to be managed. It took me days to recover from that. I kept doing everything I did, waking early, caring for the children, cleaning, cooking. But something had changed inside me. It wasn't anger, at least not only anger. It was a painful clarity that arrived slowly, like sunlight entering through a crack you didn't know existed. And with that clarity came questions I had avoided asking myself since I arrived. Why had she brought me? Not in a sentimental way, not the question of a wounded mother. In a practical, real, honest way. What was the true plan? I looked at my life in that house with the eyes of someone who had finally stopped protecting themselves with illusions, and what I saw was simple and brutal. Priya and Vikram both worked full-time. The children needed someone at home. A babysitter in the United States cost more than any salary I could imagine. And I was a 69-year-old mother with nowhere to go, who barely spoke English, who depended on them for everything, and who would work for free because we were family, and family doesn't charge. I don't know if Priya planned it all that way in a cold and calculated manner. Honestly, I don't know. But I know the result was this. And I know she knew it too. In June, I went to the doctor for the first time since I arrived. Priya drove me because I needed to renew a blood pressure prescription. In the waiting room while we waited, she was on her phone the entire time. When the doctor called me, she came in to translate. The doctor was a young man with a kind face who asked how I was feeling in general. Not just my blood pressure, and I opened my mouth to answer and suddenly couldn't. I looked at Priya beside me and swallowed what I was going to say. I said I was fine, that it was just the medication. On the way home, inside the car, I stared out the window at those wide streets and those identical houses with their green lawns and thought of Kamala. I thought of my temple friends. I thought of my apartment in Jaipur, which now held my nephew's things and was no longer mine in any practical sense. I thought that I was 69 years old, that my blood pressure had been high for weeks, that I slept badly, that I carried a tiredness that wasn't only physical, and that there was not a single person in that country I could call and tell the truth to. And then I thought of something that frightened me with its clarity. I needed to go back to India, not for a visit, to truly go back, to truly start over. But for that, I needed courage I wasn't certain at that moment I possessed, and I needed a plan. Because starting over at 69, without a home of my own and without sufficient savings, in a country that had changed while I was away, was not simple. But for the first time since I had arrived in that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't joy. It wasn't peace. It was just a small spark of determination. The same spark I had felt decades ago when my husband left, and I looked at my young children and thought, I will manage this alone. I had managed before. I could manage again. I just needed to find the courage to say out loud what I had known in silence for weeks. There is a moment in every person's life where they must choose between the comfort of a known lie and the fear of a truth that has not yet taken shape. I reached that moment on an ordinary morning in July, sitting in the kitchen of that Texas house, with a cup of tea in my hands, and the sun coming through the window the way the sun doesn't ask permission to come in. The children had gone to school. Priya and Vikram had left for work, and I was alone, as every day. But that morning, the loneliness had a different flavor. It had the flavor of a decision that had ripened too long to keep being postponed. I picked up the phone and called Kamala. This time, when she answered and asked how I was, I didn't lie. I let the silence last a second longer than usual, breathed deeply, and told the truth. I said I was tired, that I was lonely in a way I couldn't quite explain, that I worked all day without anyone asking if I was all right, that I had heard my daughter call me an inconvenience without using that word, that I missed Jaipur in a physical way, as if a part of my body had stayed there and I was functioning by half. Kamala was quiet while I spoke, and when I finished, she said a simple thing I had needed to hear for months. Anjali, you can come back. You can always come back. I cried. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was young, the kind of crying that comes from deep in the stomach and doesn't ask permission and has no shame. I cried with the phone in my hand inside that American kitchen with the white countertop and let the tears run without wiping them because there was no one to see me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to hold myself together for anyone. Kamala told me that my nephew's apartment had a spare room, that she could talk to him, that my temple friends asked about me every week, that Jaipur was still there, the same as ever, waiting. She said it as if it were simple, and I know it wasn't as simple as it seemed. But in that moment, it was exactly what I needed to hear. Not the perfect solution, just the confirmation that there was a way out. I spent 3 days planning in silence before talking to Priya. 3 days doing everything normally, caring for the children, cleaning, cooking, while inside I was organizing my thoughts like someone folding clothes before putting them in a suitcase. I needed to have clarity before opening my mouth. I needed to know what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, because I knew this conversation was going to be difficult and that I couldn't go into it unprepared. On Thursday evening, after the children had gone to sleep and Vikram had gone to his office, I sat at the kitchen table and called Priya in. She came with her phone in her hand, with that expression of someone preparing to hear some request, and I said, with a voice calmer than I expected to have, "Priya, I need to tell you something important. I'm going back to India." She stared at me for a few seconds without saying anything. Then she asked if something had happened, and I said yes, that many things had happened. That I had arrived in that house believing I was coming to be a mother and grandmother, and that instead I had become a servant. That I worked every day without rest and without recognition. That I had heard myself described as an inconvenience within my own family. That I was 69 years old, with high blood pressure and poor sleep, and that I deserved more than that. Priya didn't respond right away. She did what she always did when she didn't want to deal with something. She stared at a point in the middle of the table and went quiet, but I continued. I said I wasn't speaking with anger, that I was speaking with clarity, that I loved her, that I loved the grandchildren, that none of that changed the love, but that love was not sufficient reason for me to continue living a life that was erasing me from within. Then she spoke, and what she said surprised me in a way I am still processing today. She didn't deny it. She didn't say I was exaggerating, that I was being dramatic, that I was seeing things the wrong way. She looked at the table for another moment, and then looked at me and said, with a voice that suddenly sounded much younger than the woman before me, "I know it wasn't what I promised, Mom." Just that, but it was enough for me to understand that she knew, that she had known all along, and that for some reason I might never fully understand. She hadn't been able to be different from what she was. There was no grand reconciliation that night. It wasn't the beautiful cinematic moment where mother and daughter embrace and cry and everything resolves. Real life doesn't work that way, and I was old enough to know that. There was a long conversation, at times painful, with silences that weighed heavily and words that cost both of us dearly. Priya said she was overwhelmed, that work was intense, that the marriage had its tensions, that she didn't know how to ask for help without turning my coming into an arrangement that seemed like a transaction. I listened to all of it, and I said that understanding was not the same as accepting, that I loved her and was sorry for her difficulties, but that it was not my role to dissolve my own life to fill the empty spaces in hers. Vikram found out the next day. He was polite, as always, but there was a restrained relief in the way he accepted the news that told me more than any words would have. I held no resentment for that. I simply noted it. The following 2 weeks were strange in a way that is hard to describe. I stayed in the house, kept caring for the children, because I wasn't leaving overnight and because I didn't want my departure to hurt Arjun and Meera abruptly. But there was something different in the air, a strange lightness that came from the decision made, like when you stop holding the weight of something and feel your shoulders drop without noticing. With the children, I made a point of creating memories before leaving. I did every braid Meera always asked for. I taught Arjun to make chai the way my mother taught me, with fresh ginger and cardamom crushed on the spot, and he was so serious and focused throughout the process that I had to look away to keep from crying in front of him. On the last weekend, I made a full feast for dinner, everything I knew how to make at its best, and this time, the whole family sat at the table. I don't know if it was guilt, if it was belated affection, if it was both mixed together. It no longer mattered. I received that dinner as the imperfect gift it was and asked nothing more. On the day I packed my bags, Meera came into my room and watched me fold clothes with that seriousness of hers. After a while, she asked if I was coming back. I sat on the bed, took her in my lap, and said that I would always be her grandmother, that she could call me whenever she liked, that I would send sweets in the bags of anyone who traveled, that love doesn't live at an address. She was quiet for a moment, and then rested her head on my chest, the way children do when they are processing something too large for words. I stayed like that with her for a good while, saying nothing, feeling the small, warm weight of that body that I had helped to build routines, to learn, to grow a little more. Arjun didn't come to my room, but when I came downstairs with my suitcase, he was sitting on the stairs with his arms around his knees, looking at the floor. When I passed him, he stood up and hugged me without saying anything. An 8-year-old hug, tight and awkward, and completely honest. I held that hug longer than he expected. When we pulled apart, he went back to his place on the stairs, and I continued to the door. Priya drove me to the airport. The journey was almost entirely in silence, but it was a different silence from all the other silences we had shared during those months. It wasn't the silence of someone avoiding. It was the silence of someone who no longer knows what to say and accepts that. At the entrance to the terminal, she stopped the car and sat with her hands on the steering wheel without moving for a moment. Then she turned to me and said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at her eyes that were the same as her eyes when she was a child, when she was afraid of thunder and would come wake me in the middle of the night. And I said, "I know, my daughter. Me too. I don't know what will happen between us. I don't know if our relationship will rebuild over time, if it will stay as it is, if it will get better or worse. I have no way of knowing. What I know is that in that moment, inside that Texas airport with my suitcase in hand and my return ticket to Jaipur in my pocket, I felt something I hadn't felt since before I had boarded for that journey. I felt that I was my own, not my daughter's, not that house's, not any obligation someone had designed for me without asking. My own, belonging to myself. At 69 years old, with high blood pressure, knees that ache in the cold, and longing for a mango tree outside a window in Jaipur. My own like this, imperfect and whole. The plane took off on an August afternoon. I looked through the small window as Texas grew smaller below. All the identical houses, the wide streets, the green lawns, everything that looked perfect from above and that I had come to know from within. And I felt no anger. I felt a serene sadness, the kind of sadness that doesn't destroy but teaches, that marks but also sets free. When the plane entered the clouds and Texas disappeared, I closed my eyes. I was going home, and this time I knew, with a certainty that needed no promise from anyone, that home is not the most beautiful place you have ever been. It is the place where you can be who you are without asking permission.